Not sure if you've been following the Democratic convention happening in Chicago at the moment. Gosh, the Americans know how to put on a big show, don't they? It's something a lot calmer here in New Zealand, a lot more sedate and reasonable. Or is it, actually? A political commentator and, director of the Democracy Project, Bryce Edwards, joins us now. Bryce, kia ora.
Kia ora, Morena.
Now, we won't get into American politics because there's enough that's happening in this part of the world. Darlene Tana is saying that she's not going anywhere, and even though she has been officially kicked out of the Green Party, she's still going to vote along party lines, a party that doesn't want her.
Yes, so she was one of the list MPs that came in at the last election. Since then, there's been controversy about her own background and her business dealings, or at least dealings with her husband's company. The Greens carried out that independent investigation, which took a very long time, and essentially it said some very negative things about her. So the Greens decided they didn't want her any longer. And of course, once you're elected, you normally, even if you leave a political party, and she resigned from the Greens, I guess before she was kicked out, she continues in Parliament as an MP, but she's essentially an independent. But we now have this new law, commonly talked about as the waka jumping law or party hopping law, which means that if a party loses one of their MPs, if that MP leaves the party, that the original party can effectively write to the Speaker telling the Speaker to eject that person from Parliament, to kick them out. And I think the Greens have always had a dislike for this law. So they've always strongly opposed it for lots of good reasons, I believe. Mm-hmm. But now they're talking about using it because they feel that having lost an MP, it's not justice. And so they're considering whether to get rid of her. But of course, Darlene Tana herself says that she's not going anywhere and she won't voluntarily step down.
This issue of whether or not she will still vote along party lines, because I suppose the issue with the party hopping bill is that it affects the proportionality of the parliament. Is there a little bit of a point there? I suppose nobody can hold her to account as to whether or not she keeps her word in this regard. But, I mean, the proportionality of parliament, this is the reason for the party hopping bill.
That's right. So it's so parties can keep that original proportionality that they got on election night effectively. And Darlene Tana is trying to argue against that, saying, well, I'm still voting in Parliament the same as the Green Party, so I'm not actually disrupting that proportionality, even though I'm no longer in the party. I think she is, grasping at straws somewhat. I don't think that's going to necessarily, it's not going to necessarily change the mind of the Speaker. If the Speaker gets this letter from the Green Party leaders saying they want her out, I don't think it will change it, but it might change the mind of some of the Green Party activists and members, because we've got a meeting in, I think, 9 days' time where it's actually the members have to decide whether to allow the leaders to kick Tana out. And I think some of them, might think, well, this is getting a bit too authoritarian. Mm-hmm. And what's the harm in Tana sticking around if she's still voting the same way?
Any instincts on which way it's likely to go on this one? I mean, it's up to the Green Party members, I suppose.
Look, Green Party rules are that there needs to be at least 75% of those voting. So that's going to be quite a hard threshold to meet. Yeah. I've got no doubt that a majority of Green members, activists, would support kicking her out. But I'm not sure if they'll totally get to 75% or not.
Yeah, and interesting to see how that goes. And interesting, I suppose, within factions and different delegations within the Green Party. It's not necessarily a united party. There's people that vote Green for a range of different reasons. So interesting to see how that plays out. Certainly. Hitting political headlines yesterday with the commemoration of the the coronation of the Māori King, King Tuheitia, happening, of course, at Tūranga Waiwai in Ngaruawahia. All political parties except for ACT in attendance, and some tough words from the marae, Bryce.
Yes, so this is kind of a repeat of what we see at the start of each political year with the Ratana and then the Waitangi celebrations. Now we've got a new one on the calendar, it seems, and so most of the party leaders are going along. And we've seen over the last few days there's been debate on the marae. There's been a lot of pressure on the government, and essentially ACT have turned out to be the bogeymen here. Because of course, we've got David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill coming up into the House soon, and it's very polarising. But at the celebrations, the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, made it very clear that although the government, National and New Zealand First, had agreed to vote for Seymour's legislation at the first reading, they won't vote for it after that. So they're ruling it out, and I think that was very well received at the celebrations. That's what the crowd wanted to hear.
That wasn't the only issue, of course, and 7AA is another contentious issue, amendments to Oranga Tamariki legislation. That's perhaps a more difficult issue for the Prime Minister to dodge, given that it's his party backing it.
Yeah, I mean, this government's pushing on a number of different issues that relate to the treaty and to Māori at the moment. And so they'll go softly on some of them, but they're going to stick to their guns on some as well. And they'll be looking out to wider society rather than just what is being said on the pai at the marae. So, the government will be doing focus groups, doing market research. They want to know what Middle New Zealand thinks. And I suspect that on things like the Oranga Tamariki change, there's probably a wider audience that is in favour of that. So, but whereas the Treaty Principles Bill, I think that's a lot more polarised, and there is a lot of uncertainty about whether it'll actually make things worse. And so we also saw a poll come out on Monday asking people whether the current government is making race relations better or worse. And quite a large amount, 46%, said they thought they were making things worse. 10% thought they were making things better, and 37%, I think it was, said that not much change. So it's kind of fairly even between those that think it's getting worse and those that think it's the same or getting better. And
hey, speaking of polls, actually, perhaps not popular on the marae, but Christopher Luxon doing pretty well in the latest polls, increasing his likability, it seems. Yeah, so there was a big jump, I should say, of 5% points. So he's gone up from being the preferred Prime Minister, I think, from 20% last month to 25%. So, that's a fairly sizable jump. The party popularity hasn't really shifted. So I just find it quite amazing that National's still on 38%, pretty much exactly what they got in the election. All the other parties are pretty similar. They've hardly moved. So we're seeing a lot of, fire and fury and, heat in politics, lots of, strong emotions, but I don't think it's shifting the dial. I don't think people are changing their votes on things like the treaty or some of these more controversial issues. The Greens have lost 2 percentage points in the latest poll, and that's not terribly surprising because they've had to deal with a lot of controversies. But by and large, I don't think people are getting into these controversies as much as maybe the media think they might be. The worm hasn't turned in that regard. And I mean, you're talking about polling Middle New Zealand. Of course, Middle New Zealand all got tax cuts recently, so perhaps that's helping, Bryce. Well, yes, except I don't see the National Party jumping up in the polls either. So they're just solid where they are. I just don't think any of these changes are moving the dial at all. Well, hey, appreciate your comments and analysis as always. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Andrew. Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.